It started with a silence so heavy you could almost hear the cameras breathing. Donald Trump sat at the long, polished mahogany table, the kind that seemed to stretch on forever. The lighting above was bright enough to make every detail sharp. The gleam of gold cufflinks on his wrist, the subtle creases in the black suits worn by the Secret Service, the flash of press badges on the journalists' chests. Around him, aides shuffled papers, whispered last-minute notes, and prepared for another predictable press briefing. The atmosphere was routine. Policy talk, carefully crafted jokes, and the usual back-and-forth jabs at reporters. The kind of performance everyone had seen 100 times before. But then, it happened. From the third row, a young reporter from a small independent news outlet slowly rose to his feet. He wasn't from one of the big networks. His camera crew was just one person with a handheld rig. And yet when he spoke, his voice carried a sharpness that sliced through the air. "Mr. President," he said, calm but cutting, "I have something for you. These aren't my words. They're the voices of people you've never met." Every head turned toward him. The room stilled, sensing something out of the ordinary. The reporter stepped forward, his movements deliberate. He placed a thick, slightly worn envelope on the table in front of Trump. It made the faintest thump as it landed. No one moved. Trump raised a single eyebrow, leaning back in his chair as if weighing whether this was a challenge or a stunt. "What is this?" he asked. "Letters," the reporter replied, "from Americans who feel you'll never hear them. But today, you will." The room's mood shifted instantly. You could almost feel the tension ripple across the faces of Trump's aides. A couple of them took a step closer, as though preparing to intercept. Trump's fingers tapped the envelope. The cameras zoomed in, sensing that this was no ordinary exchange. For a moment, he just stared at it. Then, with a small shrug, he tore it open. The first sheet of paper trembled slightly in his hands. Not because his grip was weak, but because the words on it carried a weight he hadn't yet measured. The handwriting was uneven, the ink faint in places. "Dear Mr. President, I'm a retired coal miner from West Virginia. I voted for you in 2016 because you promised to bring back jobs. But now my town is empty. My grandson had to move away to find work. I'm not angry. I'm just asking you to remember us." Trump's smirk, the one that usually came out when dealing with the press, didn't appear. He read the letter in full, then glanced at the reporter. "And you're saying these are real?" he asked. "Every one of them," the reporter said, his voice steady. "Verified, unedited, untouched." Trump's eyes narrowed slightly, and without a word, he reached for the next page. This one was shorter, and the handwriting was much neater, a child's. "My name is Lily. I'm 10 years old. My dad died because we couldn't pay for his medicine. I know you're busy, but please, can you make sure this doesn't happen to other kids? My mom says you have the power to help. I believe her." Trump froze for a fraction of a second. The cameras caught it, that tiny flicker of hesitation before he turned the page. The room was absolutely silent. Even the low hum of the ventilation seemed to fade. An aide stepped forward, whispering something in Trump's ear, clearly urging him to set the letters aside and move on to safer ground. But Trump waved him off. "No," he said, "let's keep going." The next letter came from a farmer in Iowa. "My crops are failing. I've never been into politics, but I believe in survival. If you can help, help. If not, at least don't make it worse." Trump read each word slowly, like he was tasting them, searching for something between the lines. By the time he reached the last letter, his posture had changed. His hands rested still on the table, and his gaze was fixed. Not at the press, not at the aides, but at the page in front of him. "Mr. President, I served in Afghanistan. I came back with one leg and no job. I don't care about party politics. I care about my brothers and sisters still out there. Please don't use us as talking points. Use your position to make a difference." Trump lowered the paper. The room waited for the quip, the deflection, the Trump trademark. But instead, he looked straight at the reporter. "How many of these do you have?" "A lot more," the reporter said, "and they'll keep coming. People just want to know their words don't vanish into the void." Trump gave a slow nod, his eyes unreadable, but clearly not untouched. "Send them to me," he said quietly. And with that, the meeting ended. Not with a roar, but with the lingering weight of words that could not be unsaid. Trump leaned back in his chair, the leather creaking under his weight, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. The cameras zoomed in, their lenses focusing on the slight curl of his fingers as he took the thick envelope in hand. With a deliberate motion, he tore it open. The sound, a sharp rip, echoed in the hushed room. Inside was a stack of letters, folded neatly, their edges softened by handling. He pulled the first one free, unfolding it slowly, almost theatrically. The paper trembled ever so slightly, not from his hand, but from the unsteady handwriting scrawled across it. Dear Mr. President, I'm a retired coal miner from West Virginia. I voted for you in 2016 because you promised to bring back jobs. But now my town is empty. My grandson left for another state. I'm not angry. I'm just asking you to remember us. The words hung in the air like dust motes in sunlight. Trump's eyes scanned the page. His smirk, the practiced one reserved for awkward moments, flickered and faded. He looked up, his gaze locking on the reporter who had brought the envelope. And you're saying these are real? The reporter didn't blink. Every one of them verified, he said firmly. No edits, no filters. Straight from the people who wrote them. A faint ripple moved through the room. Several aides shifted in their seats, exchanging glances as if silently debating whether to intervene. The Secret Service agents didn't move, but their eyes were sharp, watching everything. Trump said nothing more. Instead, he reached for the next letter. This one was written in neat block letters, but the paper itself was creased and worn, as if it had been carried in a pocket for weeks before being sent. Mr. President, my family has lived in the same small town for 3 generations. Our main factory closed last year. We've been told to adapt, but adapting means leaving behind everything we've built. I'm writing because I don't think Washington understands what it feels like to lose the heart of a town. Trump's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. His eyes moved over each line, slower this time. He didn't comment. From the press area, cameras clicked softly, trying to capture the moment without breaking it. The tension was no longer just political. It was personal, almost intimate. One aide leaned toward another and whispered, but the sound didn't carry. Trump turned the page over as if checking for more words. Then he slid the letter to the side, placing it carefully, not tossed or crumpled. Without pause, he reached for a third letter. The envelope felt thinner, the handwriting inside lighter, almost delicate. As he unfolded it, the voice of a child emerged. My name is Lily. I'm 10 years old. My dad died because we couldn't pay for his medicine. I know you're busy, but please, can you make sure this doesn't happen to other kids? My mom says you have the power to help. I believe her. For a heartbeat, the room seemed to freeze. Trump didn't look at the cameras this time. His eyes stayed fixed on the words. The reporter stood silent, letting the letters speak for themselves. The smirk was gone now, and though his expression remained guarded, there was something different in the way Trump held that thin piece of paper, as if he knew it carried more than just ink and words. The third letter wasn't from an American adult at all. It was from a child. Trump unfolded the paper slowly, the crisp sound of the crease breaking echoing in the quiet room. His hands were steady, but his eyes narrowed ever so slightly, the faintest sign that his focus had sharpened. The handwriting was small and careful, each letter shaped with the deliberate effort of someone who had learned to write not too long ago. At the very top, in faint pencil marks, was a name. Lily. My name is Lily. I'm 10 years old. My dad died in the hospital because we couldn't pay for his medicine. I know you're busy, but please, can you make sure this doesn't happen to other kids? My mom says you have the power to help. I believe her. Trump stopped reading. His lips pressed into a thin, tight line, the kind of line he usually wore when preparing a sharp retort. But this wasn't the usual moment for a retort. There was no crowd to laugh at a quick jab, no political opponent to spar with, no rally to cheer him on. For a brief second, his eyes didn't look at the cameras or the press, or even the reporter standing across the table. They looked somewhere else entirely, somewhere far away from the room, somewhere that had nothing to do with politics or policy. The reporter didn't speak right away. He let the weight of the words settle over the room, giving the silence space to grow heavier with every passing second. When he finally did speak, his voice was low but cutting, slicing through the stillness like a thin, sharp blade. "These aren't attacks, Mr. President," he said. "These are pleas from people who don't think anyone in Washington is listening." The words hung in the air, solid and unmoving, as if they had been nailed to the walls. The room was dead quiet. Even the constant low hum of the air conditioning, a sound you didn't notice until it stopped, seemed to vanish. No papers rustled. No one cleared their throat. The only sound was the soft, cautious click of a camera shutter, as though the photographer was afraid that the noise might break something fragile. Aides exchanged uneasy glances. Their backs straightened, their expressions tightened. This wasn't how things usually went. Normally by now, Trump would have shifted the spotlight, redirected the moment with a joke, a barb, or a talking point. But this time he didn't. Instead, he kept looking down at the paper in his hands. His thumb traced the edge of the letter, smoothing over a small crease, flattening it. The motion was slow, almost absent-minded, but there was something deliberate about it too, as if keeping the paper neat somehow mattered. The reporter took a small step forward. "She believes you can help, Mr. President. Her mother told her you have that power. She believes her mother." Trump finally looked up, not toward the flashing cameras, but directly at the reporter. His eyes were unreadable, holding a mixture of calculation and something quieter, something that didn't belong to speeches or sound bites. For years, he had been the center of every room he walked into, the one directing the flow, controlling the pace, deciding when to speed things up and when to slow them down. But right now, the pace wasn't his to control. It was being set by a 10-year-old girl's words on a sheet of paper. From somewhere behind him, one of his aides cleared their throat softly, a polite but unmistakable cue to move on. But Trump didn't move on. He didn't even glance at them. The silence stretched. Seconds felt longer than they should have. Even the journalists, trained to pounce on the smallest gap in conversation, stayed still, their pens frozen above their notepads, as though any movement might break the spell in the room. Finally, Trump lowered the letter and placed it beside the others he had already read. But he didn't push it away. He didn't fold it back up. He laid it flat, face up, the words visible to anyone close enough to see. It was a small gesture, but it didn't go unnoticed. The press saw it, the aides saw it, and the reporter definitely saw it. The reporter didn't smile, he didn't gloat, he didn't even speak again. He just stood there watching, waiting to see what would happen next. Trump glanced back at the envelope, still resting on the table, thick with more letters, heavy with more voices. His hand hovered over it for a moment before his fingers brushed the edge. He lingered there, almost as if weighing whether to continue, then reached in and pulled out the next folded sheet. The silence didn't break, it deepened. One of Trump's aides, dressed in a perfectly pressed navy suit, stepped forward from the edge of the room. He leaned in close, one hand shielding his mouth from the cameras, and whispered something directly into the president's ear. His expression was tight, a silent plea to wrap this up, to get back on the script, to steer the moment into safer waters. But Trump didn't even glance at him. He lifted a hand and waved the aide away with a short, firm motion. "No," he said, loud enough for the room to hear, "I want to finish." The words landed with quiet force. The aide stepped back, his face neutral, but the tension in his posture betrayed his unease. Trump reached into the envelope again, pulling out another letter. The paper was slightly crumpled, the edges softened from travel. He unfolded it carefully, his gaze fixed on the page. When he began to read, his voice had shifted, lower now, slower, as if the act of speaking the words carried a different kind of weight. "I'm a farmer in Iowa. My crops are failing from weather changes. I've never believed in politics, but I believe in survival. If you can help, help. If not, at least don't make it worse." When he finished, he didn't move the paper right away. His eyes stayed on the letter, reading it again in silence. The camera zoomed in, catching the subtle stillness in his face. No smirk, no raised brow, no rehearsed pause for effect. The room was hanging on every word. For years, Trump had thrived on control. He was the master of dominating a room, speaking over interruptions, bending conversations to his will, filling every moment with his presence. But now, something unusual was happening. The loudest thing in the room wasn't his voice. It wasn't the shuffling of reporters' papers or the clicking of camera shutters. It was the quiet. The kind of quiet that follows a truth too heavy to ignore. The reporters who normally peppered him with rapid-fire questions stayed silent. The aides who usually scanned the room for signs of trouble stood still. Even the air felt different, heavier, more charged. The reporter who had brought the letters made no move to speak. He didn't interject, didn't press, didn't try to turn the moment into his own performance. He simply stood there, hands clasped loosely in front of him, letting the words in those letters do all the work. Trump set the farmer's letter down beside the others. This time he placed it carefully, aligning it neatly with the edges of the stack, as though creating a small, deliberate archive of the voices he had just read. His hand lingered on the top sheet for a moment. His eyes swept the room briefly, not in search of approval, but as if gauging whether the weight of these words had landed on everyone else the way they had on him. The silence held, and in that stillness, the power in the room had shifted, not toward the reporter, not toward the press, but toward the people whose voices, written in ink and carried in an envelope, now sat on the table in front of the most powerful man in the country. By the time Trump reached the final envelope, the room felt different. Gone was the restless shuffling of aides and the aggressive clicking of cameras. It was as if the air itself had thickened. Everyone was waiting for the last card in the deck. Trump's hands, which had been casually flipping letters open minutes earlier, were now still. He slid his finger under the flap and pulled out the paper with deliberate care. And then he read, "Mr. President, I served in Afghanistan. I came back with one leg and no job. I don't care about party politics. I care about my brothers and sisters still out there. Please don't use us as talking points. Use your position to make a difference." The words hung in the air. They weren't dramatic, they weren't polished. They were plain, and that's what made them heavy. Trump's eyes lingered on the last sentence. He didn't blink for several seconds, as though reading it twice. Then, without folding the letter, he set it carefully on the table in front of him. He didn't smile, he didn't smirk. The usual showman persona, the quick comebacks, the playful jabs, gone. For once, he didn't look at the press. Instead, his gaze locked onto the reporter who had brought the letters. "How many of these do you have?" he asked, his voice low. The reporter didn't flinch. "A lot more," he replied, "and they'll keep coming. People just want to know their words don't vanish into the void." Trump gave a slow nod, as if weighing the words carefully. There was no sarcasm, no deflection, just silence, followed by something unexpected. "Send them to me," he said. It wasn't loud. It wasn't meant for the cameras, but the microphones caught it anyway. A few reporters exchanged glances, surprised. One of Trump's senior aides, standing just a few feet away, shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't on the schedule. This wasn't the plan. Moments ago, he had whispered to the president, suggesting they end the segment before it drifted into unfamiliar territory. But Trump had waved him off then, and now it was clear why. The meeting ended without the usual political theater. No sparring with journalists, no parting shot for the headlines, just a quiet, almost awkward wrap-up. As Trump stood, he gathered the letters into a neat stack. He didn't hand them back to the reporter. He didn't give them to an aide. He tucked them under his arm like something personal, something that needed to leave the room with him. The cameras followed him as he walked out. No big gestures, no rally-style energy. Only one detail stood out: his grip on that thick envelope. It wasn't loose, it was tight, deliberate, as though letting go wasn't an option. But it wasn't just the envelope people noticed. It was his eyes. They weren't softened in the sentimental way movies like to show. They were sharper, alert, focused. The look of a man who had just been handed something he couldn't ignore, no matter how inconvenient it might be. For years, Trump had been a master at controlling the room, bending the narrative to his rhythm. But in those last minutes, the narrative wasn't his to control. It belonged to the miners, the farmers, the little girl named Lily, and now to the soldier who had signed that final letter. The footage aired that evening. Commentators debated whether it was a calculated move or a genuine reaction. Some said it was just another moment in the endless theater of politics. Others argued they had seen something different, not weakness, but recognition. But the people who had sent those letters weren't watching for political strategy. They were watching for proof that their voices had been heard. And for one brief, unguarded moment, it looked like they had been. Because sometimes it only takes a few pieces of paper, a few plain sentences, to cut through speeches, slogans, and stage lights. Sometimes words don't just disappear into the void. Sometimes they land. And when they do, even the most seasoned politician can find himself walking out of a room, clutching an envelope like it's the heaviest thing he's ever carried. The truth you just saw is only half the story. Want the rest? Hit that subscribe button. The secrets are just getting started.